Hi, this is the Warsaw and this is the fourth movie on my YouTube channel. Today we will talk about the evolution of poker player. Of course it's not the kind of evolution that every poker player goes through, but from what I have seen it's very common that it happens to many players. So at first, when someone who have learned the rules of poker and start to play, uh, he cannot really recognize which hand he should play and which not. Only thing he really looking for is he's looking for action. So he wants to see the flop. He wants to see what hand he could possibly hit, and anything that he hits on the flop, he stays in the game. And well, maybe you see players like this on your table who like limp every pot, and then even if he had like just a fourth pair or any kind of draw, he stays in the game. Well, this kind of player plays definitely too many hands, and the other thing, he do it when he does play, he do it too passive. The reason for that is many of the recreation players, they don't really understand how can you not be in the hand. Why would you fold this 8-4 offsuit under the gun when you can possibly hit quads, or you can hit two pair, or you can hit a straight draw, flush draw, and even a full house too. So when they start the game, when they start playing, they don't really understand the idea of folding. So the first thing they do is they just want to be in the hand. The other thing they do is when they try to stay in the when they try to play the hand, they don't recognize that there is like strategy behind this. So they don't know where should they raise, where should they re-raise, where should they just call. So most of the time they just see the hand and they limp, which means call the big blind and want to see what happens later in the game. This style of play we would call it loose passive. Loose because player plays many hands, and passive because when he plays passively. So this kind of player doesn't recognize that it's not the idea of poker just to even win the hand, but to lose as little as possible when you have bad hand, and to win as much as possible when you have big hand. So most of the time, even when player like this hits really strong hand, he doesn't playing really aggressive. He just maybe bets the minimum. He's afraid that he scares the opponents from the pot. That's why he plays too passive. After that, after some time, when this player who, well, if he tries to improve the game, if he tries to understand the game better, at some point he will recognize that not all the hands that he's playing, they not bring him enough profit. Maybe he doesn't think exactly this way, but he definitely noticed that some of the hands do better, and some of them most of the time put him into trouble. And at this point he's starting to see that the hands like 9-4, 10-3, queen deuce, jack tray, and other hands like this, they just doesn't make a lot of sense of playing. So after some time, this player will start to play fewer hands, but the thing that most likely doesn't change for some time still is that he's still playing his game passive. So player like this would be called tight passive. Tight because he play fewer hands, and passive because he's still playing his game pretty passive. So for example, players like this, when they have ace king or queens or even aces, they still, for some reason, they don't play those hands aggressively. Well, sometimes they try to trap. So maybe those kind of players if you notice them in the game, they can limp or just call big blind, let's say under the gun or on some other position, and then try to make a small re-raise when someone else raises. So and you can almost always assume that when they do something like this, it's really strong hand. It's not always aces, but sometimes it could be like ace king or kings or queens, but it will not be something like 9-5 suited. So when you see something like this, it's very somehow easy to put the player on the hand. So those two first styles, those two first points of evolution, those players most likely will lose money, even more than most likely. They almost definitely will lose money, especially with the first style. The second style, it's a little bit better, but I don't know many players who could passively make money of playing tight passive. It's still they still need to develop their strategy a little, and that's what happens in the third point of evolution of poker player, when those players who still want to improve the game start to understand the game more, they turning into at least decent poker players. And at this point they play those few hands they played before, but now instead of just calling the big blind, they choose to raise. They start to understand that it's very good for them if they can narrow the number of opponents. So it's when they limp, sometimes like 3, 4, 5 other players come into the pot too, and even if they have aces, it's very difficult to win the hand with many opponents in the pot. So this time they decide that they need to raise, so and thus they can make not only some other players to fold the really weak hands, but also the other players who will play with them. It's much easier to put them on specific range of hands they're playing with. So that's the upside of being a little bit more aggressive than before. And also sometimes they can raise a little bit weaker hands and do it the same way as they play their strong hands. On this way they're starting to be a little bit more hard to read for the other players at the table. And also at the same time, when they more aggressive, they put more money in the pot, so if they have good hand, they can win more money. So this is the third point of the evolution of poker. This is when those few players that came from number 1 to number 2 and now are in the number 3, those are the players that have the potential to finally start making money of poker. And this style, called tight aggressive, tight for few hands and aggressive for playing aggressive before flop and after flop, this is the style that when used well, you can always almost guarantee that it will bring you money. So this is the most important step in evolution of poker, turning from the player who plays few hands but passive to this one that plays few hands but aggressive. So some of the players they stay at this step and they just play tight aggressive, and this style, as I said, can easily bring them money. But some of the players that are really read the hands good, they think a lot about poker, they learn new strategies, they discuss the hands on poker forums, they can start to develop new strategy when they start to play more hands and still do it aggressive. So this style of game would be called loose aggressive, and it can go both ways. I mean, some of the players overplay this style, and they even they were winning players when they were playing tight aggressive. Some of the players go a little bit wrong way and they start playing loose aggressive. They think they know everything about poker, and now they will be outplaying the other players at the table, and they don't have enough skill to play this style, but they try to do it and they start to lose money again. So for those players, I would recommend to get back to number 3, strategy number 3, but of course those players may not be aware of that this style don't work for them. But you need to be aware of players who use this strategy correctly, because this would be the player you don't want to have at your table if he's doing this well. So when someone starts to play more hands, but he plays all the hands the same way as he would play his fewer hands, suddenly it's very hard to put him on the hand. But I need to stress it out a little bit one more time. This must be player who exactly knows what he is doing. If he's smart enough and if he's good enough to employ this strategy correctly, this would be probably the best player at the table. But it's not easy to be able to do that, so there is not many players like this. But it's very hard to put the player on the hand. He's almost always betting. His reading skills are very good, so he can easily put you on the hand you have, and this is the guy that will take control of the table and win a lot of money probably. But as I said before, it's not easy, and especially if you're just starting your adventure with poker, I would not recommend to try to use this style, at least for some time. If you're good enough to win with the style number 3, tight aggressive, just stick to it for some time and maybe talk with some friends that play poker more, read some forums, discuss some hands, and maybe you can try to play a little bit more hands and more hands for some time and see how it works for you. So this would be in short the evolution of poker player that I would assume most of the players would come through when they start playing poker. And here's at the end some things to have in mind, knowing already what we talk about those different 4 styles. So first thing, you need to remember no style can guarantee the winning. So as I said, there is almost no chance that someone would be winning with the style number 1 when you lose passive. There is really hard for me to assume that someone can win with the second style, which would be tight passive. This game is simply too passive and too easy to read for other players to be able to win money, maybe at some lower stakes, but when you go a little bit up, I don't think this would be the correct way to play. But even when you tight aggressive, which in fact should be correct strategy to play not so many hands, and when you get them then you play it aggressive, it should be good for you, and in general it will be good for your game, but you still can make some other mistakes after the flop, after the turn, after the river, which would take away your winnings. And even that you're playing the correct pre-flop strategy, those few leaks after the flop would take away your winnings, so you need to improve that too. And as I said, style number 4, loose aggressive, it's very difficult to play this style, so it doesn't mean that if someone is trying to employ this strategy that he will be winning, because it's very, very difficult. And I once again say I don't recommend that to players who just start, or even like they already play a little bit poker, but well, I think you need to be really experienced player to do that. The second thing that you need to take a look at is, as we can see, those 4 styles, it looks almost like evolution cycle, because at first you play many hands and at the end you play many hands. So and you can, what I said, that some players cannot win the money with the style number 1, suddenly someone who plays the same hands at the end of the evolution cycle can make money. Of course, the difference would be, everything between in that cycle. So, understanding the game more, reading other hands, the hands of other players more, understanding that aggression is really important in the game, and also um, um, experience and number of hands played make you play better with the same hands. You can start to play those hands that at some point you decided to get rid of when you come from strategy number 1, loose passive, to strategy number 2, tight passive. So you get rid of some hands, and suddenly in strategy number 4 you can start to play those hands again and make money of them. But of course that's what between is the most important. So it looks like a circle. So at some point you play those hands, then you stop playing them, then you start playing them again, and it gives you money. What to remember, point number 3, creating an image is very important, especially in tournament play. You must be aware of that some players, they just try to make the impression, for example, that they lose player and lose aggressive player, and when you bear that in mind, then at some point you can forget that they actually changed the strategy in between, and you think they play many hands, when in fact you forgot to notice that last, let's say, 2 rounds of poker they didn't play a single hand. This could be achievable sometimes by playing in specific style at first. So I know few tournament players who come to the table, or even when the tournament starts, they play like first 2, 3, 4 hands of the tournament, and this creates the idea for other players that they play really loose, and other players tend to don't give those players credit at some point. And this could be a little bit tricky, because there could be actually a player who plays many hands and you just need to notice that, but this also could be really smart experienced player who just want to create an image that he's crazy and he's maniac, and what we see at first, it stays in our mind. So you need to not only see what players does in his first hand that he plays, but also what he does in next hand. So also some other players can and we can skip to number 4 when we come to mixing the styles. Some players can play really tight at first levels of tournaments when the blinds and antes are small, but when the blinds go up, when ante is introduced to the game, they suddenly start to play more hands, and this could make the feeling for you that they have, every time they raise they have a hand, because before they didn't play almost any hands, and suddenly they're raising many hands. So you think, okay, so this guy is now on hitter because before he was folding, now he plays many hands, so it means that he actually have a hand. But those players exactly know what they're doing, so you also need to notice that what players do at some specific times of the tournaments. And number 5, which is most important, you always need to adapt to your opponents. You cannot come to the tournaments and think to yourself, okay, today I'm gonna play really loose, I'm gonna dominate my table, I take over control of over my table, and I will bluff, I will make my opponents to fold, and this way I will win a lot of chips. And when you come to the tournament, suddenly you can see that all other players at your table do exactly the same, and suddenly the correct strategy to play a little bit fewer hands and adjust to the table. And the same could happen in the other direction when you come to the tournament and you remember that last time you maybe played too many hands, so you come to this tournament and say, okay, this time I'm gonna play solid, I'm gonna play just few hands, and you sit at the table and all the players fold all the time. So the correct strategy at this table would be to play more hands and try to steal some pots away from the players that play too tight. And also this point says adapting to opponents, but I would also say you need to adapt to circumstances that happen in the tournament play. You need to play different styles at the beginning of the tournament. You need to play a little bit different when antis are introduced. You need to play a little bit different when it's full table, when it's a little bit short-handed table. You also need to adapt when you're on the bubble, so when you're getting close to the money. Then when you're on the final table, when you play short-handed, when you play heads up, this also will need you to adapt and change your strategy. So you cannot just assume that, okay, playing 20 different hands will win you money, because at some point you need to play even less than that, and at some point you need to play much more hands. So I hope during the next movies we will go more in depth about the strategy about this too. So this evolution of poker player, this movie was only introduction to strategy and something that you need to look for at the tables, and as a kind of practice you can just take a look at some players at your table and try to guess which style they play and try to adapt to that. And this would be all for this movie. I hope you enjoy it. Please leave the comments or send me emails at thewarsawpoker@gmail.com, and see you next time.